If you open your mouth, I'll say it was you who provoked me, and no one will doubt me. That's exactly how he said it, with the calm of someone who has done this before and knew he was going to do it again. I was scared to death. My name is Doris Jean Miller. I'm 84 years old today, and I'm from right here in Texarkana, in the heart of Arkansas. A lot of people think that a small town is a quiet place. Ah, well, tranquility for whom? For those who close their doors and pretend they don't hear anything? Because inside some houses, there's only feigned silence and pain swept under the carpet. My grandmother, Mary Ellen, was one of those women who thought that everything could be solved by praying, cleaning, and a well-delivered beating at the right time. She used to say that women had to learn to keep quiet in order to maintain peace in the home. Peace for whom, Grandma? Him? She was the one who taught me to walk with my legs closed and my eyes down. She said that if I learned properly, the men would respect me. Little did she know that inside our own house there was a man who didn't respect even God. His name was Calvin Miller, my grandmother's eldest son, my direct uncle. He had lived with us forever, ever since he lost his job and said he was getting back on his feet. He never did. He just took root in our lives like a plague. He lived on the sofa, with a sweaty t-shirt and a beer in his hand, talking loudly to the television and too quietly to me. At the time, I still shared a room with my cousin Lacey, who was a little older, but of course, Lacey lived at her boyfriend's house and hardly ever stopped by. So that left the room just for me, and the corridor, and Calvin's gaze following me around the house, and my grandmother saying, "Go and help your uncle. He needs company." Company. That's the word she used the day he asked me into the back room. I went because I didn't know how to say no yet. Because when a child grows up in a place where obedience is more important than safety, they learn to shut up before they even understand what's going on. I went into that room, and I remember the smell, a strong smell of cigarettes, mold, and something else I can't explain, but which makes me sick to this day. He locked the door and spoke softly, with that tone of someone who wants to pretend to care. He said I was pretty, that I was becoming a girl, that I needed to learn a few things that women learn at home, according to him. And every time I thought about telling my grandmother, his voice came into my head, "No one will believe you." And worse, I knew he was right. My grandmother thought he was the man of the house. She always said so proudly, "Calvin is the head. Calvin is strong. Calvin protects." Protect from what, Grandma? From whom? After the first time, nothing changed in the routine of the house, and that's what hurt the most. I sat at the table at dinner, my legs aching and my chest crackling inside, and my grandmother served me fried chicken as if everything was normal. Calvin laughing at the jokes on TV, and there I was, with a knot in my stomach and the taste of fear choking in my throat. School was my only breath, but even there, he started to keep an eye on me. One day, he saw me laughing with a classmate and was waiting for me to leave. He said that a girl of mine didn't get it on with guys out there. I didn't really understand what he meant, but I understood that it was a threat. From then on, I started walking with my head down, even afraid to smile. I know you're probably wondering, what about your mother, Doris? Oh, my mother. She left when I was little. She said she was going to find a way to live and never came back. I don't know if it was courage or cowardice, but what was left was me, my grandmother, and Calvin. And everything was kept in a silent pact of appearance. The neighborhood? They saw. Of course they did. I'd walk down the street all hunched over, staring at the ground. The teachers saw the dark circles under my eyes, the silences, the fear, but nobody said anything. Nobody wants to pick a fight with someone else's family, right? Even less so in a city where everyone knows everyone, except what really matters. But there was one day, one single day, that something almost got out of hand. It was when I accidentally knocked over a cup of tea in Calvin's lap. I was shaking so much that I couldn't hold the cup properly. He got up slowly, looked at me in that warning way, and just said, "Wait for me in the back room." That day, I trembled so much that I almost peed right there. I ran out into the yard and hid inside the doghouse. I stayed there, dirty, shivering, praying to disappear. But at night, when the house fell silent, he found a way to find me. And then he said it, that phrase that has never left my head since. If you open your mouth, I'll say it was you who provoked me, and no one will doubt me. That's exactly how he said it, with the calm of someone who has done it before and knew he was going to do it again. And he did, for a long time. If you've made it this far, well, leave a like. Every like is like a hug for this old lady. When you grow up afraid, you learn to hear the world in a different way. I knew the sound of his footsteps going up the stairs, the way the doorknob turned when he was calm, and the dry crack when he came in anger. I even knew his silence, because his silence was the worst. It was the announcement that the night was going to hurt. After that day when I knocked over the cup and hid in the yard, my grandmother began to look at me with a certain annoyance. She didn't say anything, but just watched, like someone who senses that something is out of place, but prefers to pretend that it's just the wind blowing through the window. I'd come home from school with my head down, but inside I was boiling. That phrase of his still stuck in my ear. If you open your mouth, I'll say it was you who provoked me. And there I was, a child, already carrying guilt that wasn't mine. The following Sunday, my grandmother decided to send me to help the pastor at church. She said that girls who learned to serve in God's house became upright women. I went because anything was better than being alone with him. But he went after me. He arrived smiling, with that saintly face he knew so well. Everyone in the church said that Calvin was a good, hard-working man who took care of his family. If they knew what I knew, they wouldn't even let him through the door. After the service, he pulled me by the arm and said in my ear, without losing his smile, "There's no point in running, Doris. I'll always be around." My stomach churned, but I held my head high. For the first time I looked into his eye. He didn't like it. He squeezed my arm harder, and that's when I realized that he didn't just want to do those things. He wanted me to be afraid. He fed off that. That night, Lacey came home. She arrived all excited, talking about her fiancé and her plans to move to Little Rock. She slept in the room with me, and I could almost breathe. It was strange, but just having another body in the room made my heart beat a little slower. But the joy was short-lived. The next morning, she left early, saying she was going to spend a few days with her mother-in-law, and I stayed. Again. That was the day I tried to escape for the first time. I waited until lunch was over, until my grandmother fell asleep in her rocking chair, until Calvin locked himself in his room to watch TV. I took a piece of bread, stuffed it in a bag, and walked slowly out the back door. I cut through the undergrowth, with the sun beating down on my head. I didn't know where to go. I just knew I had to get out of there. I walked until my legs ached, barefoot, with the hot earth burning my feet. I reached a dirt road, where trucks passed by from time to time. I hid behind some bushes and waited. Every time I heard an engine, my heart raced. I wanted to call for help, but fear choked my throat. What if they stopped and didn't believe me? What if they called my grandmother? After almost an hour, I heard footsteps. I cringed, holding my breath. It was him, Calvin. I don't know how he knew, but he did. He came walking calmly, like he knew he was going to find me. He called me by name, sweetly, as if he were a father. "Doris, my flower, come here. You don't have to be afraid." I didn't move, but he saw my dress swinging between the branches. He pulled me tight, dragging me back to the house as if I were a sack of flour. He threw me into the back room and locked the door from the inside. I thought I was going to die. I really did. But he didn't do anything that day. He just stared at me in silence and then said, "Next time it'll be worse." And he left. My grandmother scolded me for running away. She said I was becoming a rebellious girl, that I was learning bad things from the neighbor's daughter. She grounded me without even going out into the yard. When I tried to explain that I just wanted to breathe, she replied that girls who complain too much end up alone in the world. "You should be grateful to have a man around to look after the house," she said. I felt like shouting, but I kept quiet, because if I did, I'd get beaten up. I spent the next few days praying. I didn't know if God would hear. I just asked for a safe place. Just one. I began to observe everything in the house. His schedule, his quirks, where he kept his room key, how he moved after drinking. Because, my dear, when you can't fight, You learn to map the enemy. And I did. At school, the teacher called me in for a chat. She said I was different, very quiet. She offered me a sweet and put her hand on my shoulder. For a moment, I wanted to talk. But then his voice came back into my head, and I said it was all right. She nodded, but I could see in her eyes that she knew it wasn't. Only, like everyone else, she pretended it was. That night, I slept with an aching stomach, not from hunger, from fear. He opened the bedroom door with his foot, walked in slowly and stopped at the edge of the bed. He just stared at me. Then he said, "You're growing up, Doris. Soon no one will protect you anymore." That hit me harder than anything he'd ever done before, because I understood. One day, not even my grandmother was going to be a shield. He was just waiting for me to have nowhere else to run. After that day when he dragged me back home, something in me changed. It wasn't courage, not yet. It was something else, a kind of silent resistance. I began to realize that if I couldn't run away with my feet, maybe I could with my head. That's when I started lying, little lies, just to test the limits. I'd say I was in pain, that the teacher had asked for help after class, that my classmate's grandmother had asked me to say the rosary. It was all a lie, of course, but it was the beginning of an escape that I didn't even know how it was going to end. I knew he was always watching me. When I was in the yard, he'd find a way to get to the window. When I went to the bathroom, he would wait outside. It got more and more unbearable. I started to develop a tic, a habit of biting the corner of my finger until it bled. My grandmother noticed, but said it was spoiled girl stuff. She believed him more than she believed me. She always did. Because for her, a man was a man. And when girls grow up, they're always blamed for something. At school, I started to pay attention to things that I hadn't noticed before. I overheard a classmate saying that she was moving in with her aunt, that she was going to live in another city. That shone a light on me. I went home thinking, what if I had an aunt? Just any aunt? But I didn't. My mother was an only child. But then I had another idea. The neighbor on the back street, Mrs. Loretta, was a lonely lady who always gave me sweet bread when I stopped by. I started going more often. I'd make up excuses, say that my grandmother had sent something for me. I'd stay there listening to the radio with her, helping fold laundry, anything to keep me out of the house. Loretta started to like me. She said I was different from the other girls, quieter, more attentive. One day, she asked if my uncle was my father. I said no. She kept quiet for a while, and then said I could go there whenever I wanted. That was like a shelter in a storm. I went whenever I could, sat on the floor of her living room, ate stale cookies, and listened to the radio squawk. It was little, but it was peace. At home, the atmosphere became more and more tense. Calvin began to show impatience. He complained that I was walking around too much. He started questioning my grandmother about where I was going, who I was talking to. She said I was becoming a teenager, that it was a phase. He didn't like that. And I sensed that he was getting ready for something. He wasn't going to let it go. And I knew that. One afternoon, I came home from school and found the back door open. I was surprised. When I went in, everything was silent. My grandmother wasn't in the rocking chair. Neither was Calvin. I walked up slowly, and as I passed the living room, he came up behind me. He grabbed me by the shoulder and said we needed to talk. I tried to let go, but he held me tighter. He took me to the little room where they kept the tools. He said I was getting too bold, that girls who go out a lot start to think they have freedom. I shivered. He locked the door from the inside and started saying that I was growing up fast, that I wouldn't be able to hide for long. I was shaking so much that I thought I was going to faint. But before anything happened, we heard my grandmother's voice calling from outside. He froze. He looked at me angrily. He said we'd finish the conversation later, and he left. That night, I couldn't eat. Every bite was an effort. Every sip of water went down like a stone. My grandmother asked if I was ill. I said it was just the heat. That was a lie. It was fear. The fear that was eating me up from the inside out. The next morning, I made a decision. I took a piece of paper from school and wrote a letter. I made up that I had a distant aunt who had invited me to spend a few days in a neighboring town. I wrote as if I were that aunt. I took care with the handwriting, wetting the paper to make it look old. I handed it to my grandmother with a surprised look on my face. She read it and said she'd think about it. I feigned joy, and I prayed. I prayed like never before. Over the next few days, I began to observe her behavior. From time to time, she read the letter again. I commented to myself that maybe it would be good for me to get out a bit, to learn other things. Calvin noticed. He started to get restless. One day he came into the kitchen and asked, in front of her, if the story about the trip was true. My grandmother replied that she didn't know yet. He stared at me, a cold, cutting look, and I knew right then that he was up to something. That morning, I woke up to a noise, someone pushing on the bedroom window. I got up slowly, my heart racing. It was him, trying to get in. I froze. He saw me and whispered that if I left that house, he would follow, wherever I was. I closed the curtain and curled up on the bed. The noise stopped, but the fear didn't. The next day, I spoke to Mrs. Loretta. I told her part of the truth. I said I didn't feel well at home, that I was afraid of my uncle. She looked at me with the eyes of someone who has seen a lot. She hugged me slowly and said that if I needed it, she could find a way to hide me for a few days. My heart almost burst out of my mouth. I began to plan. Little by little, I hid food, coins, anything I could use. I prepared myself inside. That plan was my only thread of hope. I still didn't know how I was going to get out, but I knew I couldn't stay any longer. When you decide to really run away, time changes. The hours seem heavier, the days longer, and any false step becomes a threat. I woke up every day with my heart in my throat, waiting for a sign, any sign, to tell me that the moment had arrived. But all that came was the sound of the kettle on the stove and the sound of my grandmother's voice, softly singing old hymns, as if that would heal the cracks that she herself pretended not to see. I kept going to Mrs. Loretta's house, always with some made-up message. She started saving a few things for me, a change of old clothes, some cookies stored in an ice cream jar, a small flashlight. It was our silent pact. She didn't ask too many questions, and I didn't explain either, but I knew she understood, because an older woman recognizes in a girl's eyes what no one wants to see. Calvin became increasingly restless. He started picking on everything. He said I was a nag, that I spent too much time away, that I needed to learn to obey. My grandmother, even though she understood his tone, preferred to say that I was growing up and that it was just a phase. I could see the fear in her eyes, but she made a point of disguising it with religious discourse and a woman's obligation. One afternoon, coming home from school, I saw his car parked in the middle of the driveway. I thought it was strange. He never stayed there at that time. When I went in, the house was empty. The smell of coffee was still warm on the table, but no one was around. I climbed the stairs on shaky legs, each step weighing like lead. The door to my room was ajar. I pushed it slowly. There was no one there. But on my bed, he had left a folded piece of my clothing, a note without words, but as clear as dirty water. He had gone in there. He'd gone through my things. I no longer had room to breathe. I ran to my grandmother's room, trembling, and asked her if she knew he had come into my room. She looked away, said that maybe it was a mistake, that he was just looking for something. I wanted to scream, but I kept quiet, because I learned early on that in that house, the girl's voice was worthless. That night, I slept in my clothes, with my chair against the door. The fear of hearing the doorknob turn was worse than any nightmare. When morning came, I decided it was now or never. I spoke to Loretta before school, telling her I had to go that very day. She agreed. We arranged for me to leave school and go straight to her house. She was going to hide me in the attic for a few days, until the dust settled. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew I had to get out of that house alive. At school, I could hardly pay attention to anything. My stomach churned, my eyes glued to the clock. When the bell rang, I ran out without talking to anyone. I turned down 2 streets, entered the alley behind the grocery store, cut through the Higgins yard, and arrived at Loretta's house. She was waiting for me on the porch. She hugged me quickly, pushed me inside, and closed the door. She took me to the back, where there was an old door leading to the attic. We climbed up slowly. The smell was of dust and old wood. There was a thin mattress on the floor, a blanket, and a bottle of water. I stayed there, curled up, listening to the sounds of the street, the noise of life outside. It was strange to feel fear and relief at the same time. From upstairs, I could hear Mrs. Loretta walking around the house as if it were any other day. She was small, but she walked steadily. With every step she took, I felt a little more courage spring up in me. That first night, I hardly slept. The noises from the street, the cracking of the roof, the fear of him looking for me out there. But he never showed up, at least not that night. The next day, Loretta came up with a plate of food hidden in a paper bag. She sat down on the floor next to me. She said she'd thought of a better idea. She knew a trusted acquaintance who lived in a town a few hours away. She worked in a family home and could arrange something for me. I just needed to wait a few days for her to get in touch. Hope gave me strength. For the first time in a long time, I began to imagine an afterlife, a place where I could just be a girl, where no one would open the door at dawn or touch me where they shouldn't, a corner where I could sleep without fear of the noise in the hallway. But fate has its ways. It hears us dreaming and laughs. On the third day, I heard loud knocks on the front door, 3 in a row, then silence, then another sequence. It was his way of knocking. I recognized it instantly. Loretta didn't answer, but he shouted. He called my name. He said he knew I was there. He called her a nosy old woman. He said he was going to call the police, and he did. I was paralyzed. Loretta ran upstairs. She told me not to move, not to make a sound. She went downstairs and was talking to someone outside. I could hear everything muffled, but I understood enough. He said that I had run away, that I was making things up, that I was trying to destroy the family. The police wanted to come in. She wouldn't let them. She said only with a warrant. The argument lasted for what seemed like an eternity, and then silence. He left, for the time being. That night was the worst, because the fear came back stronger. Now he knew. He knew I was trying to leave. He knew where I was, and that was too dangerous. The next day, waking up was like coming out of one nightmare and falling into another. My head throbbed, and my body ached from all the accumulated fear. I stayed up there for hours, quiet, with my ear to the ground, trying to hear any footsteps, any knocks that might indicate that he had returned. But everything seemed calm, too quiet. Loretta came up with a piece of bread, some warm milk, and a heavy-lidded look on her face. She said she'd gone to the police station to find out what he'd said. He told a lot of lies. He said I was disobedient, that I was confused, that I had been influenced by bad company, and that the family was trying to protect me from myself. And believe it or not, there were people listening to him, because white, educated, soft-spoken men, they always believe him. As for the frightened girl, who disappeared from home without warning, she becomes the crazy one in the story. The news spread fast. People from the church went to Loretta's house saying that she was hiding a child, that it was a crime, that she was going to get into trouble. One of them said he was going to tell the social worker. I heard everything from upstairs, my hand shaking on the mattress cloth. Loretta responded with the calm that only those who have faced a lot in life have. She said that I was there by choice, that no one had kidnapped me, that I didn't want to go back. But she knew, and I knew too, that it wouldn't last. I stayed there for 2 more days. I didn't even go to the bathroom. Loretta improvised a bucket, gave me extra sheets, and did everything she could so I wouldn't have to go downstairs. But the atmosphere was getting too heavy. She called me in a low voice and said that the plan to go to the neighboring town had to be brought forward. Her acquaintance, a woman called Frances, had agreed to take me in. She worked as a cook in a rich house and had a little room in the back where I could stay until I was old enough to work. She was going to take me by bus at dawn, with a small bag and a different name. I was going to be her niece from the countryside. I didn't sleep that night. I kept going over everything in my head, every detail, every step. If anything went wrong, I could end up back in that house. And if that happened, I knew he would do more than threaten. He was going to do it the way he'd wanted from the start, and I couldn't let him. At 3 in the morning, Loretta came up. She handed me a simple outfit, worn-out shoes, and a bag with a few things in it. I went downstairs with her, quietly. My heart was pounding with dread. We walked to the stop, without saying much. The sky was still dark, the street deserted. When the bus arrived, she looked at me with moist eyes and said she regretted not having done it sooner. She hugged me tightly and put the ticket in my hand. I got on without looking back, because if I did, I might not have the courage to go. The journey was long. Every stop felt like a test. I looked around, expecting to see him get on at any moment, but he never appeared. When I arrived in town, the woman who was waiting for me looked tired and had the arms of someone who has already carried much more than she should. Frances. She looked at me carefully, asked if I ate everything, if I could clean well, and if I could keep quiet. I said yes to everything, because I would do anything not to go back. The house where she worked was big, full of rules, but nobody knew me there, and that was a start for me. The little room at the back was small, with a narrow bed and a window that didn't open properly, but it was mine, only mine. I slept there the first night, with an aching head, but a light body. No footsteps in the corridor, no locked door, no smell of cigarettes coming from the mattress next to me. I started helping Frances in the kitchen, washing dishes, peeling vegetables, sweeping the floor. Sometimes one of the bosses would ask where I was from, and we'd repeat the story. Niece from the countryside, came to try life, lost her parents early. Nobody questioned much. The employees' lives didn't matter to them, and that, in a way, protected me. For weeks, I sat there quietly, obedient, invisible. Fear was still with me, of course. Some nights I woke up scared, sweating, thinking it was there. But he wasn't, and that was enough to keep me going. One day, one of the bosses had a nasty fight with her husband and went off screaming. The scene made me shudder. His way of shouting was similar to Calvin's. Frances saw me turn pale. She waited for the confusion to pass and came over to me. She sat down next to me and said that she didn't need to tell me anything. I just had to promise that if one day someone knocked on my door saying they knew me, I wouldn't open it. I promised. The months went by. I grew up there, little by little. I learned to cook, to dress like the other girls in town, to walk down the street without looking lost. But fear is like a shadow on a cloudy day. Even when the sun comes out, it's there, waiting to cover everything again. It had been almost a year since the day I got on that bus, with my soul hanging on the thread of courage. The routine in the house where Frances worked was hard, but predictable. And predictable, for someone who came from where I did, was almost a luxury. I'd wake up before the sun, help with breakfast, then clean the corridors, organize the rooms, and end the day with throbbing feet. But no one called me flower there. No one locked doors. No one whispered my name in the dark. It was as if I had managed to scrape a part of that past life off my skin. Only the body forgets more easily than the soul. Frances was a tough woman, but fair. When she noticed that I was quieter than usual, she'd tell me to look after the garden. She said that working in the soil helped to clear up my thoughts. And it really did. It was while planting lettuce that I began to remember that there was still a future. I sometimes dreamed of a life where I could study, have my own corner, maybe teach other girls to run before I became a prisoner. But dreaming too much also tires me out, and too much fatigue opens the door to tragedy. One Saturday afternoon, I went to the little shop to buy soap powder and matches. Frances had given me some change and asked me not to be long. The town was small, and I knew the way by heart. I walked with my head free, distracted, looking in shop windows and listening to the noise in the street. When I turned the corner of the bakery, I felt my body freeze. He was there, sitting on a bench, like someone waiting for someone. Calvin, the same way of sitting, the same owner of everything posture. And that look that made my skin crawl. On the spot, I turned my back, ran into the nearest store and hid among the hangers. My heart was beating so loudly that it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I don't know if he saw me, but I saw enough to know that it wasn't delirium. It was him. And if he was there, it wasn't by chance. He was looking for me. He found out. Maybe someone from the church told him. Maybe he followed a trail, but he found me, and now I knew that peace had an expiration date. I waited more than an hour before leaving. I walked back along the back street, cutting through vacant lots, my whole body shaking. When I entered the house, Frances noticed me immediately. She asked what had happened. I couldn't speak. I just sat on the kitchen floor and started crying like a child. She hugged me tightly and waited for me to calm down. When I managed to explain, she remained silent for a while. Then she said she had a plan. That night, she woke me up with a small suitcase and told me that her boss had gone on a trip and that she was going to take the opportunity to get me out of there. She had an acquaintance in another city, far enough away to start again. But it had to be quick, before he came back, before he showed up at the door. We left before daylight, by car, with the radio off and our eyes on the rearview mirror. At every turn I looked back, hoping to see his figure in the middle of the road. But all I saw was dust. We arrived in a small town, surrounded by countryside and silence. The house of our new acquaintance, called Nora, was simple but welcoming. She didn't ask too many questions. All she said was that she would keep me away from prying eyes and that I could rest there. For the first time in months, I lay down on a real mattress, without the noise of the city, without the tension of the big house. I thought that perhaps my luck had changed. For the first few days, I kept to myself. I read what I had, helped with the cleaning, sewed some old items that Nora kept for donation. Time passed slowly, but at least it passed. I even started to sleep properly. But the fear, it never left. It followed me around like a clinging shadow. I was afraid of going out, of talking to strangers, of anyone looking too closely. I started hiding a pocket knife under my pillow, not because I planned to use it, but because just having it around made me feel less weak. After a few weeks, Nora said she knew of a community school where I could learn to read better and take some courses. I didn't know if I wanted to go back to school. My head was still too heavy, but I accepted. It was better than waiting for the past to knock on the door. At school, I met other girls. Some were quiet like me, others with the hard look of someone who had also run away from something they couldn't tell. We understood each other in silence. We didn't need to say everything. A look was enough. That's when I started writing. I used to take an old notebook and write everything down. Not with my name. I made it up. But I put it out there. Every night I wrote a page. About fear, about anger, about the way the world turns a blind eye to those who most need to be seen. But even there, far away, safe, there were days when I woke up scared, with my heart racing, sweating, smelling his scent close by. It was as if my body kept a memory even of what I was trying to forget. And when that happened, I would think again, will he ever stop looking for me? Will this fear ever go away? I had been living with Nora for over 6 months. Life had settled into a calm rhythm. I woke up early, tended the vegetable garden, read my old notebooks, helped out at church with the bread we sold at the bazaars. Fear still accompanied me, of course, but in a quieter way. I no longer trembled at the sight of a stranger on the corner. I could walk to the grocery store without looking back every 2 steps. I thought that maybe this was a new beginning. One of those mornings, Nora called me out on the balcony. She said that a girl from a neighboring town needed help with her young son. Her husband had left her, and she needed someone to look after the boy while she worked. It would only be a few afternoons a week. It wouldn't pay much, but it would be good for me to get by. She would take me herself on the first day, just to make sure everything was all right. I thought it was a good idea. I wasn't afraid of children. I was afraid of adults who feign affection with their voices too low. On Monday, Nora took me. The house was simple. The boy was cute, with big eyes and an easy smile. His mother, called Leah, was one of those women who look like they've lived 3 lives before they were 30. There were marks on her face that weren't just the result of time. She spoke little, but the look in her eyes said it all. We understood each other at the first handshake. She showed me the boy's room, the routine, where the milk was, the diapers, and then rushed off to work. I stayed there, sitting on the floor, playing with the little one, and feeling a strange peace, as if, for a few hours, I too was just a little girl again. For a few weeks, The routine went smoothly. I went there 3 times a week, spent the afternoon with the boy, and returned before dark. Leah would always leave me some change, sometimes a piece of cake, and I'd thank her with my eyes. She didn't ask too many questions, and I didn't tell her anything. We each carried our own invisible suitcase, and we respected each other's weight. But it was on a Wednesday, at the end of the month, that the mistake happened. The boy was asleep. I was doing the dishes when someone knocked on the door. I thought it was Leah. If I'd thought for 2 seconds, I would have peeked in first, but I didn't. I opened it. It was a man, tall, in a light suit, with overcombed hair. He said he was from the town hall, that he needed to speak to Leah. I told him she wasn't in, to come back later. He looked me up and down with a strange smile and said, "You're Doris, aren't you?" The world stopped there. The plate fell out of my hand. I didn't reply. He repeated, "Doris Jean Miller, from the city of Texarkana. Is that right?" I slammed the door in his face, locked everything, took the boy on my lap and went straight to the bedroom. I sat on the floor, my heart pounding, my hands in a cold sweat. He knew my name. He knew where I came from. He knew where I was. And worse, he knew enough to show up there, like someone knocking to sell an encyclopedia. I waited for Leah to arrive. She came in and saw my face. She hung up the phone, sat with me, listened to everything. She hugged me, took a deep breath, and said it was time to do something bigger. Nora was called. She came the same day. The two of them spent the night talking, exchanging phone calls, trying to think of a way out. The next morning, they said it was best to move to another state. They already had contact with a foster home in another region, where I could be enrolled in a school and start all over again with new documents, as a minor at risk. I cried. I didn't want to run away anymore. I was tired of changing my name, learning new ways, memorizing lies. But I had no choice. He knew, and if he did, he was coming back. I knew Calvin. He didn't let things slip away like that. He was patient, but when he made up his mind, he didn't rest until he'd done it. On the Saturday before my trip, I went to the square by myself. I sat on a bench and looked up at the sky. It was blue, clear, calm. I felt angry, a lot of it, at him, at my grandmother, at those who pretended not to see, at those who believed his lies, and even at me for believing that I could live in peace. But sitting there, I felt something else too, a kind of strength that I didn't know existed, because even though I was afraid, I was there. I was alive, and he hadn't stopped me. I went home and wrote. I wrote everything down in a notebook. How he spoke, how he looked, how he acted. Every detail. It was like a scream on paper. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but it was mine. It was my truth, and no one could take it away from me. The journey was long. I slept on the hard seat of the bus, with my head against the window and my notebook on my lap. When I arrived, the new house seemed colder, quieter, but there was a clean bed, hot food, and no one staring. And for the first time, someone asked, "Do you want to talk about what happened?" The social worker's name was Ruth. She was a small woman with a firm voice, hair tied back with a clip, who walked like she was always late for something. But when she looked at me and calmly asked if I wanted to talk, I understood that it wasn't a protocol question. It was a question from people who really wanted to listen. My hands were shaking and my stomach hurt, but I shook my head slowly and said yes, for the first time, out loud. Yes, I want to tell. We sat in a room that smelled of old books and cold coffee. She gave me a handkerchief, said I could take my time, that no one was going to force me into anything. And I started, slowly. The words came out as if they were coming through thorns. I told him about the back room, the broken cup, the false note, the suitcase hidden with the help of Mrs. Loretta. I talked about the journey at dawn, the penknife under the pillow, his calm smile telling me that no one would believe me, or my voice faltered. My eyes filled up, but I carried on. Ruth took few notes. She looked a lot. She had a way of holding the pen that made me feel that what I said mattered. When I finished, she didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "This is very serious." She said something else. She looked at me and said, "You were much stronger than you should have been, but now you don't have to be alone." It tore me apart. I cried with sobs, because that's what hurt, having carried everything alone. for so long. Over the next few days, she introduced me to a state lawyer. She was a tall black woman with a strong accent and the expression of someone who had already beaten up half the world. She explained to me that, even without a formal complaint, my report was enough to start a protection process. I could stay there, in the foster home, until I turned 18, with access to school, psychological support, and help to get new documents. But if I wanted justice, the road would be more difficult, longer, and risky. He asked if I wanted to try. I thought about it for days. I was afraid, of course. Afraid of him, of what he could invent, of how his city could protect him. But I was also angry. A dry, old anger that had lived in me ever since I heard him say that everything was my fault. And in that anger, I found an answer. Yes, I wanted it, not just for me, but for any girl who came after. We started the process. Everything was very quiet. The lawyer collected the notebooks I'd written in, talked to Loretta on the phone, tracked down Leah and other people who could confirm that I'd been on the run for a long time. It wasn't easy. Each piece of paper required another. Each conversation brought back memories that I wanted to bury, but I kept going, because now I had somewhere to fall if the ground disappeared. Meanwhile, I started studying. I returned to the classroom like someone entering enemy territory. I didn't trust anyone. I thought everyone knew about me, but nobody did. There, I was just a quiet girl, new at school, with donated clothes and eyes that avoided contact. And it was there that I met May. May was a force of nature. She spoke loudly, laughed with her whole body, wore colourful braids, and didn't accept short answers. She sat down next to me on the second day and said, "You look like you need a friend." And she stayed. She brought me pieces of cake in my lunchbox, lent me glitter pens, told me I should smile more, even without knowing why. One day, without thinking, I told her I was on the run. I didn't say everything, but I said enough. She didn't make a fuss. She just said, "If anyone comes after you, they'll have to push me first." And she smiled. That friendship was rebuilding me. With every laugh, every notebook shared, I felt a piece of Doris coming back. Not the one he tried to erase, but the one that was born from what survived. I began to really enjoy writing. My English teacher read my essay and called me in at the end of class. She said I had something special in my words. I smiled, a little awkwardly, but inside, a spark ignited. I was called to give my formal testimony in front of a judge. The lawyer prepared me. She said he could be present, or send a representative. My body froze, but I accepted. I entered that room like someone entering a ring. I didn't see him there, but I felt his name floating in the air. I said it all again, this time in a firm voice. No crying, no pause. The judge listened, asked questions, thanked me, and I left on shaky legs, but with my head held high. Months later, I received the news that he was being investigated, that other similar reports were being raised. Women from his hometown, people who had never had the courage to speak out. But now, seeing that someone had stood up to them, they began to come forward. I cried, not from fear, of relief, because I knew, I'd always known, that it wasn't just me. After the statement, after the signed papers and the sleepless nights, I thought he was going to disappear, or at least back down. But he wasn't the type to accept losing. He lived on control, and when someone escapes the control of people like that, it becomes an obsession. It started with a letter. No name on the sender, just the address of the old town. Inside, a folded sheet of paper in his handwriting. "I know where you are, but there's still time to make things right." That was it. A dry, direct sentence, written in blue pen and smelling of threats. I showed it to the lawyer. She had it registered and asked for protection. But protection, for a poor girl in a shelter, is just a pretty word on paper. The next few days were hell. Every time a different person passed by the school, I thought it was him. With every car stopped outside, my chest tightened. Ruth tried to calm me down. She said that he was being monitored, that any false step could get him arrested. But I knew that. He was clever. He never left a footprint. He knew how to hide in daylight. He knew how to look harmless. That's what made him dangerous. May wouldn't let me go. She slept with me in the shelter room whenever she could. She made jokes, sang cheesy songs, made up nicknames. But when she saw my lost look, she kept quiet. She gave me the space that only a true friend understands. One day, I put the letter he had sent into her hands. She read it in silence. Then she tore it to pieces and said, "This doesn't define you anymore." And she threw it out of the window. I started writing more. Every night. I filled 3 notebooks with memories, sensations, thoughts that I didn't even know were there. Writing was the only way not to go mad. It was my cry, my shield, my way of not being swallowed up again. I started showing some things to my English teacher. She said I should think about turning it into a book one day. I smiled in disbelief. But deep down, the idea gave me strength. Then came the day he really showed up. Not in person, but he sent another man, an old acquaintance from my family, from church. He showed up at the door of the shelter saying that he had come to get me, that the family was worried, that I was being manipulated. The carers were confused. The man was nice, well-dressed, with a calm voice. He said he had authorization, but I heard him from the corridor, and I recognized his name. He was Calvin's friend, one of those who laughed at his jokes, one of those who pretended not to see, but knew everything. I ran into the living room, stopped at the door, and faced the man. I said I wasn't going anywhere. He tried to smile, said it was just to talk. I replied loudly, so that the whole house could hear, "If he wants to talk to me, let him come himself, but bring the police along." The man's eyes widened. He feigned surprise, tried to hold his pose, but he left, and he never came back. After that, the shelter changed the rules. They transferred me to another unit with reinforced security. I felt like I was in a prison, but safe at the same time. For the first time, there were fences protecting me, not imprisoning me. I received legal advice. The lawyer explained that he was being pressured, that other girls had shown signs that they might speak out too. Justice was starting to turn, slowly but surely. Little by little, the cloud began to lift. I continued studying. I entered an essay competition. I wrote about escape, about what it means to survive in silence. I won 2nd place. I've never felt so alive. I began to think more clearly about the future. College, maybe, psychology, or journalism. Something that would let me talk and listen. I was only a few months away from turning 18, and this time, it wasn't a date of fear. It was freedom really coming. I wouldn't have to rely on shelter or favors anymore. I would be able to choose where to go, who to talk to, and what to say. And that, my dear, was everything I had dreamed of for years. When I was 18, I was called into the shelter's office. I went in thinking it was just to renew some paperwork. But the coordinator was with Ruth and the lawyer. They both looked as if they knew that what they were about to say was going to move me. They sat with me slowly, as if I was going to break down just listening to them. They said that the process had moved on, that Calvin, after months of playing the misunderstood, had been summoned to testify. Other girls, now women, had started talking, different stories, but with the same roots: closed doors, silent nights. That same way he acted without leaving a visible mark, but with a scar on the inside. He denied everything. Of course he did. He said it was a fabrication, that I was problematic, that I ran away on a whim. He tried to blame me again, as he always did. Only this time it didn't work, because now I had people on my side, witnesses, documents, cross-examination, a new judge on the case, young, firm, who listened to each of us with respect, without interrupting, without rushing, just listening. And that alone was more than any adult had done for me in my entire childhood. I was called to speak again. I was now of age, and my voice was now firm. I walked into that room with my back straight. I looked straight ahead and told everything again, without stuttering, without apologizing. When I left, I didn't cry, but my whole body was shaking, not from fear, from relief, because now it was official, now it was on paper, now it was true even for those who doubted it. The news spread quickly. In Texarkana, where he still lived, the whispers began. People from the church saying that they had always thought he was strange. Others feigned surprise. My grandmother, they say, became ill when she heard. She sent a message saying she wanted to see me. I said no. because anyone who denies me a childhood has no right to my presence in old age. I got a call from the police. They said they were going to search his house. They were looking for evidence, photos, letters, anything to link the accounts. I thought it was just another protocol. Until, 2 weeks later, Ruth showed up at the shelter with her eyes wide open. They found it, a notebook, his, with names, dates, surnames, and my name there, written as if it were an object, as if I had belonged to it. I read that page. I held it in my hands. The world spun, but I didn't collapse, because now I had the evidence. With that, the case became criminal. He was arrested, without handcuffs. He got into the police car slowly, looking like a poor man, but he went. And this time there was no denying it. He no longer had the protection of the small town, the reputation as a respectable man, the "she made it all up" speech. Because it wasn't just me. It was a lot of people. It was years of silence breaking all at once. I thought I was going to feel revenge. I didn't. I felt emptiness, as if a weight had been lifted off my back, but the hole had been left behind. I spent days quiet. I didn't want to talk or write, just standing there, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what was coming next. Because what I really wanted, my dear, was not to see him locked up. It was to have had a life where he had never existed. I started therapy. I really did. I used to go, but I didn't say much. Now I wanted to understand. Why had so many people kept quiet? Why did my grandmother let me? Why did it take me so long to believe that it wasn't my fault? I dug into these questions with the therapist, a sweet woman, who never said, "I understand," because she knew I didn't. But she said, "I'm here," because I didn't understand. But she said, "I'm here," and that was enough. I started writing again, no longer in hidden notebooks, but on loose sheets of paper, which I scattered around the room, short stories, letters to girls who never knew their own voices. One of them I read at a school assembly. They said I should publish it. I thought about it. I still do, maybe one day. But for now, I just write to breathe. Calvin is still in prison awaiting his final trial. The trial is still going on. And frankly, I don't care what they decide, because as far as I'm concerned, he's already lost. He's lost control. He's lost his silence. He's lost the power to make me shut up, and no one can give that back to him. It was on a Saturday afternoon, one of those days when the sky seems heavy, even without rain, that I received the message. Unknown number. All it said was, "I'm one of those who also went through it. I need to talk." My body froze on the spot. I felt the same chill I felt when I heard footsteps in the corridor, but now with a strange mixture of hope, I answered without thinking. I arranged to meet in a public park, full of people. I knew I was no longer at risk, but the old fear still beat inside, like an old drum that insists on making noise even when no one else is playing. I got there first. I sat on a bench near the fountain, my hands sweating and my eyes scanning each person who passed by. She came in wearing a light blouse, jeans, and her hair up in a bun. When she saw me, she smiled sadly, like someone who bears the same marks as me, even though she has a different face. She introduced herself as Emily. She said she was Calvin's older sister's daughter. She grew up hearing that he was the coolest uncle, the protector, the one who brought presents, and for years she believed it, until she started waking up with an aching body and a confused mind, not understanding what happened at night when the adults slept. We sat side by side. Neither of us spoke for a few minutes, until she took my hand and said that she only had the courage to speak because she saw my name on the news. She saw that I was no longer afraid to show my face, that I told her everything, even though I didn't know who would believe me. And that's what gave her the strength to leave the house where she lived with her mother, go to the police station and tell everything. She thought she was the only one. And when she saw that she wasn't, something inside her calmed down. We talked for hours about the different ways he used, about how he made it seem like he cared, how he made us think it was our fault, about the late nights when we cried with our faces pressed into the pillow so no one would hear. We laughed too, not at the pain, but at how, even after everything, we still managed to stand up. She told me that she dreams of working in education, with children. She said she wanted to be the adult she never had around. I hugged her so tightly that it felt like I was hugging the younger version of myself, the one that had been trapped for years in the back room. After that day, we were never apart. We became sisters of choice, of struggle. We started giving talks in schools, telling our story in a subtle, respectful but firm way. Many girls came to talk to us afterwards. Some just cried. Others thanked us. And there were those who said they would never shut up again. That's why we kept going, for each and every one of them. We published a book together. It was called Nobody Will Believe, the same name as the threat that silenced us for so long. It became a symbol of resistance, a warning to those who think that a girl's pain is cool, that silence is obedience, that affection never hurts. We made a point of putting the phrase that united us in the preface: if you open your mouth, no one will believe you. And we showed, with every page, that we did, and the world listened. Calvin was sentenced, 17 years. He could get out sooner, on appeal, with good behavior, with all those good lawyer tricks. But it doesn't matter anymore, because he no longer has control over any of us. Not over me, not over Emily, nor over the others to come. He's lost what he loved most: silence. And that, my dear, is the fairest end that someone like him could have. Today, I live in a simple house with a small garden. Emily lives 2 streets over. We plant sunflowers together, write when there's time, speak at schools, help at shelters. Sometimes I get messages from girls who say that they heard my story, that they cried, that they understood that it wasn't their fault. And I always reply with the same phrase: "You're not alone. You never were." I look back and see little Doris, with her bare feet and a frightened look in the hallway. I wish I could hug her, tell her she was going to make it out. But I know that, in a way, she heard me, because I'm here, alive, counting. And that, for me, is more than a victory. It's a miracle. It's justice. It's freedom. If you've stayed with me until now, if you've listened to this whole story, give me a hug in the like section. Because every person who listens, even if they don't know my face, helps this old woman sleep better. Life didn't give me a choice, but I chose not to be silent. And that, my dear, no one can take that away from me anymore.